Maria Gonzalez woke up before sunrise just like she did every day. Her tiny apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of her old alarm clock. She stretched her arms and glanced at the framed picture on her bedside table. It was a photo of her and her 10-year-old son Diego, smiling brightly during last year's school picnic. That smile gave her strength every morning, even when life felt unbearably heavy. After slipping into her uniform, a crisp black dress with white cuffs, Maria kissed Diego's forehead as he slept soundly in his bed. Then she grabbed her bag and headed out the door. The streets were still dark, but Maria knew this route by heart. She walked briskly toward the bus stop, clutching her worn-out sneakers in one hand because they made less noise while cleaning floors. Today, like every other day, she would spend hours scrubbing bathrooms, dusting shelves, and making beds at the Ocean View Grand Resort, one of the fanciest hotels in the city. The hotel stood tall against the sky, its glass windows shimmering under the rising sun. It was a world far removed from Maria's reality, a place where people wore expensive suits and sipped champagne without a care in the world. But Maria didn't mind. She took pride in her job. To her, it wasn't just about earning a paycheck. It was about doing something meaningful. Every neatly folded towel, every spotless mirror, and every perfectly fluffed pillow mattered to her. She believed that even though no one might notice her efforts directly, someone somewhere would feel comforted by the cleanliness of their room. And that thought kept her going. As soon as she clocked in, Maria received her assignment for the day, Suite 2407. This was one of the most luxurious suites in the hotel, reserved for VIP guests. Maria had cleaned it many times before, so she knew exactly what to expect. The plush carpets, the marble countertops, the massive king-sized bed draped in silk sheets. Still, there was always a sense of awe whenever she stepped inside. It was like entering another universe, one filled with elegance and extravagance. Today, however, Maria couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. Her phone buzzed in her pocket as she started tidying up the living area. It was the principal from Diego's school calling again. Sighing softly, she excused herself to the balcony, closing the sliding glass door behind her. She figured the guest wouldn't be back anytime soon, so it was safe to take the call. "Hello?" Maria whispered, keeping her voice low. "Ms. Gonzalez," the principal began, sounding concerned. "We really need to discuss Diego's performance. He's falling behind in math, and I'm worried he's not getting enough support at home." Maria's heart sank. She wanted nothing more than to give Diego everything he needed: tutoring, extracurricular activities, a stable environment. But how could she? Between working double shifts at the hotel and taking on odd jobs on weekends, she barely had time to breathe. Yet she forced herself to sound calm and composed. "I understand," Maria replied in Spanish, her native language flowing naturally when she spoke about personal matters. "I'll do whatever it takes. Can we schedule a meeting? I'll come after my shift today." The principal agreed, and Maria hung up, feeling a mix of guilt and determination. She leaned against the railing, staring out at the ocean. The waves crashed against the shore, reminding her of the constant ebb and flow of life. Some days were harder than others, but she refused to let despair win. For Diego, she would keep fighting. Unbeknownst to Maria, someone had overheard her conversation. Inside the suite, Richard Langley sat on the couch, scrolling through emails on his laptop. A self-made millionaire with sharp instincts, Richard rarely missed details. When Maria stepped onto the balcony to answer her call, he hadn't paid much attention at first. But as her voice drifted through the thin glass, something caught his ear. He recognized the cadence of Spanish immediately. He'd spent years traveling across Latin America for business deals and had picked up the language along the way. Curiosity piqued, Richard listened intently. At first he assumed it was just casual chatter, but then he heard snippets of the conversation. Words like Diego and escuela, school, stood out, followed by phrases like "no tengo tiempo," I don't have time. What struck him most, though, was the emotion in her voice. There was a raw honesty, a mixture of love and exhaustion that resonated deeply with him. Richard had grown up poor himself, raised by a single mother who worked tirelessly to put food on the table. He remembered those days vividly, the late-night arguments about bills, the sacrifices his mother made to ensure he had a better future. As he sat there listening to Maria, memories flooded back, stirring emotions he hadn't felt in years. When Maria returned inside a few minutes later, she resumed her work without missing a beat. She wiped down surfaces, straightened furniture, and vacuumed the carpet with practiced efficiency. Richard watched her quietly, pretending to focus on his laptop. But his mind was racing. Who was this woman? Why did she seem so familiar yet, completely foreign at the same time? And why did her story tug at his heartstrings in a way he hadn't expected? By the time Maria finished cleaning the suite, Richard had already decided to find out more. Before she left, he stopped her briefly. "Thank you for your hard work," he said politely, studying her face for any hint of recognition. Maria nodded shoop, offering a polite smile before hurrying away. Little did she know that brief interaction would set off a chain of events neither of them could have anticipated. For now, Maria continued with her routine, unaware that her life was about to change forever. Richard Langley wasn't the type of man who let things slide easily. If something caught his attention, he pursued it with relentless focus. That's exactly what happened after Maria left Suite 2407. He sat on the couch for a while longer, replaying snippets of the conversation he'd overheard in his mind. The way Maria had spoken about her son, her voice filled with both love and weariness, had struck a chord deep within him. It reminded him of his own childhood, of nights spent listening to his mother cry quietly into her pillow after long days of working multiple jobs just to make ends meet. But Richard wasn't one to dwell on nostalgia for too long. Instead, his curiosity turned into action. After finishing up some emails, he decided to dig deeper. He called down to the front desk under the pretense of complimenting the staff. "I wanted to say that the woman who cleaned my suite today did an excellent job," he said casually, leaning back in his chair. She seemed very professional and thorough. The receptionist on the other end of the line hesitated for a moment before responding. "Oh yes, sir. That would be Maria Gonzalez. She's been with us for several years now and always receives great feedback from our guests." Maria Gonzalez, Richard repeated softly, committing the name to memory. "Is there anything else you can tell me about her? Just out of curiosity." The receptionist paused again, likely unsure how much information she should share. "Well, sir, all I can say is that she's incredibly dedicated, always arrives early, never complains, even when things get hectic around here. Honestly, we're lucky to have her." Richard thanked the receptionist and ended the call, but his interest only grew stronger. Something about Maria's demeanor, the quiet strength in her voice during that phone call combined with the glowing review from the receptionist, made him want to know more. And so, later that afternoon, he took matters into his own hands. Dressed in a casual shirt and slacks, Richard made his way to the hotel manager's office. He introduced himself as a valued guest and expressed his appreciation for the hotel's service. Then, almost casually, he brought up Maria again. "You know, I couldn't help but notice how hardworking your staff is," he said, flashing a friendly smile. "Especially Ms. Gonzalez. She really stood out to me today." The manager nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, Mr. Langley, Maria is one of our best employees. She's dependable, kind, and goes above and beyond for our guests. We're fortunate to have her." Richard leaned forward slightly, feigning casual interest. "That's impressive. Do you happen to know if she has any challenges outside of work? Sometimes people carry burdens that aren't immediately visible." The manager hesitated, clearly uncomfortable discussing an employee's personal life. But Richard's charm, and perhaps his reputation as a wealthy businessman, worked its magic. "Well, sir, I don't like to pry, but I do know that Maria works incredibly hard to support her family. From what I understand, she's raising a young boy on her own, and also sends money back to her parents in Guatemala. She juggles 2 jobs most days, and yet she never complains or lets it affect her performance here." This revelation didn't surprise Richard entirely. He'd already pieced together parts of Maria's story from her phone call. but hearing it confirmed solidified his resolve. Still, he needed more concrete details. So, with a mix of persuasion and authority, he convinced the manager to show him Maria's employee file. Technically, this was against protocol, but Richard had a way of bending rules when it suited him. Besides, he assured the manager that his intentions were purely positive. Flipping through the file, Richard found what he was looking for: Maria's address. It was listed as a small apartment complex in one of the city's poorer neighborhoods. He memorized the location, thanked the manager, and left the office with a sense of purpose. For the rest of the day, his thoughts kept circling back to Maria. Who was she really? What drove her to work so tirelessly? And why did her story feel so familiar? By evening, Richard couldn't shake off the image of Maria scrubbing floors and speaking softly on the phone about her son's struggles. He realized he hadn't eaten dinner yet, but instead of heading to the hotel's upscale restaurant, he grabbed his car keys and drove toward the address he'd seen in the file. The streets grew narrower and darker as he ventured further into the neighborhood. Streetlights flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows on cracked sidewalks. Buildings looked worn down, their paint peeling and windows boarded up. This was a stark contrast to the polished world of luxury hotels and high-rise offices where Richard usually spent his time. When he finally reached Maria's building, he parked his car a block away and approached cautiously. The structure was modest at best, with laundry hanging from rusted railings and children playing barefoot in the courtyard. Richard spotted Maria's unit on the second floor thanks to a faint light glowing through the window. Peering inside discreetly, he saw her sitting at a small table with Diego. They were huddled together under the dim glow of a candle. Clearly, the electricity had been cut off due to unpaid bills. Maria's face was illuminated by the flickering flame as she patiently helped Diego with his math homework. Her expression was gentle but firm, encouraging him without being overbearing. Richard watched silently, feeling a lump form in his throat. He recognized that scene all too well. It was a mirror image of his own childhood, except this time, he was on the outside looking in. For a moment, Richard considered leaving. Maybe he was overstepping boundaries, intruding on someone's private life without permission. But then he remembered why he was here: to understand, to connect, to see if there was something he could do to make a difference. With that thought, he knocked lightly on the door. Inside, Maria froze mid-sentence, her eyes widening in alarm. Who could possibly be visiting her at this hour? Cautiously, she opened the door, revealing a tall, well-dressed man standing in the hallway. Recognition dawned on her face instantly. It was the guest from Suite 2407. Panic washed over her as she stammered an apology, assuming he must be upset about something related to his stay at the hotel. No, please don't apologize," Richard said quickly, holding up a hand to reassure her. "I'm not here to complain. Actually, I just wanted to talk, if you have a moment." Maria hesitated, glancing nervously at Diego, who looked equally confused. Finally, she stepped aside and invited Richard in, though her posture remained tense. The room was tiny but tidy, with handmade decorations adorning the walls and a threadbare rug covering part of the floor. Despite the obvious signs of poverty, there was warmth in the space, a testament to Maria's resilience and care. Once seated, Richard introduced himself simply as a guest who had been touched by Maria's dedication. He explained that he'd overheard her phone call earlier that day and wanted to learn more about her story. At first, Maria was guarded, unsure why a stranger, especially someone as wealthy as Richard, would take such an interest in her life. But as they talked, she gradually opened up, sharing bits and pieces of her journey, immigrating to the United States, working tirelessly to provide for her family, dreaming of a better future for Diego. As Maria spoke, Richard listened intently, nodding occasionally but mostly letting her words flow freely. By the end of their conversation, he felt a profound admiration for her strength and determination. More importantly, he knew he had to act. This wasn't just about charity. It was about recognizing potential and giving someone the tools they needed to succeed. And so, as the candle burned lower and the night grew quieter, Richard made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Maria sat nervously on the edge of her worn-out couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The flickering candlelight cast soft shadows across the room, highlighting the cracks in the walls and the faded furniture. Across from her, Richard, Langley leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were sharp, studying Maria with a mix of curiosity and empathy. He didn't look like someone who belonged in this neighborhood, or even in this tiny apartment, but there he was, sitting humbly among the remnants of Maria's hard-fought life. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Maria's mind raced with questions. Why was this man here? What did he want from her? Was he angry about something she had done at the hotel? But as Richard began to speak again, his tone warm and reassuring, some of her tension eased. "I know. My visit might seem strange," Richard said gently, "but I promise I'm not here to cause any trouble. I just wanted to understand more about you. You see, I couldn't stop thinking about what I overheard earlier today." Maria flushed, her cheeks turning a deep shade of red. She hadn't realized anyone could hear her conversation on the balcony. It was private, personal, and now it felt exposed, raw. "I'm sorry if I disturbed you," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to talk loudly or anything." Richard shook his head quickly. No, please don't apologize. It wasn't that you were loud. It's just that your words stayed with me. They reminded me of my own childhood." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "You see, my mother worked multiple jobs to raise me when I was young. We didn't have much, but she always made sure I knew we were loved. Hearing you speak about your son, Diego, it brought back those memories." Maria glanced at Diego, who sat quietly at the table, watching them with wide eyes. She smiled, faintly, though it was tinged with sadness. "Diego is everything to me," she admitted softly. "He's why I do all of this, why I work so hard." Richard nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's clear, and I admire it. Not everyone would keep going the way you do under such difficult circumstances. But tell me, what are your dreams? Beyond just supporting your family, what do you want for yourself?" The question caught Maria off guard. No one had ever asked her that before, at least not in a long time. Most days, she was too busy trying to survive to think about her own aspirations. But now, faced with Richard's earnest gaze, she found herself reflecting on the hopes she'd buried deep inside. "Well," she started hesitantly, her voice trembling slightly. "When I first came to this country, I dreamed of opening my own little restaurant someday. A place where people could taste authentic Guatemalan food, tamales, pepián, arroz con leche, something small, maybe just a cafe. But," she trailed off, shaking her head, "it's impossible. I can barely afford rent, let alone start a business." Richard tilted his head, his interest piqued. "Why do you say it's impossible?" he asked. "Have you ever tried to make it happen?" Maria sighed, looking down at her hands. "How can I try? I have no savings, no connections, no experience running a business. Plus, I need every penny I earn just to get by. There's no room for risks like that." Richard listened intently, absorbing every word. He recognized the weight of her struggles, the same weight that had once crushed his family when he was growing up. Yet he also saw something else in Maria: resilience, determination, potential. These were qualities he valued deeply, both in himself and in others. And they sparked an idea in his mind, an idea that could change everything. "You know," Richard began slowly, leaning back in his chair, "sometimes all it takes is one person to believe in you, one opportunity to turn things around." He paused, gauging Maria's reaction. Her brow furrowed slightly, confusion evident in her eyes. "What if I told you I could help you achieve that dream? Your restaurant or cafe or whatever you envision? I think it's possible." Maria stared at him, stunned. For a moment she wondered if she'd misheard him. "Help me?" she repeated, her voice uncertain. "But why would you do that? You don't even know me." Richard smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Because I see someone who works harder than most people I know. Someone who cares deeply about her family and isn't afraid to sacrifice for them. Someone who deserves a chance to succeed. Besides, he added with a shrug, I've been lucky enough to build a successful career. Maybe it's time I use that success to help someone else. Maria's heart swelled with emotion, but skepticism lingered. Offers like this sounded too good to be true, especially coming from someone like Richard, a wealthy stranger who lived in a completely different world. But how? She asked cautiously. What would you expect in return? Nothing, Richard replied firmly. This isn't charity, Maria. Think of it as an investment. In you, in your talent, in your potential. If you're willing to put in the work, I'll provide the resources and guidance to get your business off the ground. All I ask is that you use your success to pay it forward someday. Help others the way I'm helping you. Tears welled up in Maria's eyes as she processed his words. She wanted to believe him, to trust that this wasn't some elaborate trick or fleeting act of pity. But the sincerity in his voice and the kindness in his eyes made it hard to doubt him. Finally, she nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. I'll do it, she whispered. If you really mean it, I'll give it everything I've got. Richard grinned, standing up and extending his hand. Then we have a deal. They shook hands, sealing the agreement, and for the first time in years, Maria felt a glimmer of hope. It was fragile, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a tiny spark lighting up the darkness. As Richard prepared to leave, promising to follow up soon with a plan, Maria walked him to the door. When she closed it behind him, she leaned against it, letting out a shaky breath. Diego looked up at her, his young face filled with wonder. Mom, is that man really going to help us? Maria knelt down, pulling him into a tight hug. I think so, mijo, she whispered. And if he does, we're going to work harder than ever to make sure it counts. Over the next few days, Richard wasted no time putting his plan into motion. He hired a team of consultants to assess the feasibility of Maria's dream cafe, researching locations, costs, and market demand. Meanwhile, he arranged for Maria to attend workshops on entrepreneurship and financial management, ensuring she'd be equipped to run her business effectively. Every step of the way, he encouraged her to share her ideas and vision, reminding her that this was her project, not his. At first, Maria struggled to adapt to the whirlwind of activity. She'd spent so many years focusing solely on survival that dreaming big felt foreign, almost intimidating. But with each passing day, her confidence grew. She began sketching designs for the cafe, jotting down recipes she'd learned from her mother, and imagining the faces of customers who would walk through the door. Slowly but surely, her dream started to take shape. One evening, as Maria sat at the kitchen table surrounded by notes and drawings, Diego looked up from his homework. Mom, are you scared? He asked innocently. Maria smiled, setting down her pen. Of course I am, mijo. Starting something new is always scary, but sometimes being scared means you're doing something important. And if Mr. Langley believes in me, maybe it's time I believe in myself too. Diego nodded solemnly, then grinned. I think your cafe is going to be amazing, Maria chuckled, ruffling his hair. Well, we'll find out soon enough. Little did she know, her journey was only beginning. With Richard's support and her unwavering determination, Maria was about to step into a future brighter than she'd ever imagined. And along the way, she'd discover that sometimes the greatest opportunities come from the simplest acts of faith, from believing in someone when they least expect it. Weeks turned into months, and Maria's life began to transform in ways she could never have anticipated. The initial spark of hope that Richard had ignited grew steadily brighter, fueled by hard work, determination, and a partnership that felt almost surreal. Every morning, Maria woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She was building something meaningful. Richard wasted no time turning his promise into action. Within days of their meeting, he introduced Maria to a team of professionals who specialized in small business development. There was Anna, a marketing expert with a knack for branding. Carlos, a chef-turned-consultant who understood the food industry inside out. And Elena, an accountant who helped Maria create a realistic budget. Together, they formed a support system that guided her through every step of the process. At first, Maria felt overwhelmed. She'd never imagined herself sitting in meetings, discussing things like target demographics or profit margins. But Richard encouraged her to speak up, reminding her that her voice mattered most. "This is your vision," he told her during one of their early sessions. "We're here to help you bring it to life, but only you can decide what it looks like." With that reassurance, Maria began to open up. She shared stories about her childhood in Guatemala, the vibrant markets, the smell of freshly made tortillas, the warmth of family gatherings around shared meals. These memories became the foundation of her cafe concept, a cozy space where people could experience authentic Guatemalan culture, not just through food, but through atmosphere and hospitality. The next challenge was finding the perfect location. Richard insisted on scouting multiple sites before making a decision, knowing how crucial this choice would be for the cafe's success. They visited several neighborhoods, each offering its own unique vibe. Some were trendy and bustling, while others were quieter and more community-focused. Maria felt torn between wanting visibility and staying true to her roots. One afternoon, as they walked through a modest yet lively district known for its diverse population, Maria stopped in front of a small storefront with large windows and a faded sign reading, "For lease." Something about it clicked immediately. The space wasn't glamorous, but it had character, a blank canvas waiting to be transformed. "This is it," she said firmly, turning to Richard with a glimmer of excitement in her eyes. "I can see it already. This is where my cafe belongs." Richard smiled, nodding in agreement. "Then let's make it happen." Once the lease was signed, the real work began. Renovations took center stage, and Maria threw herself into every detail. She spent hours poring over paint swatches, choosing colors that reminded her of Guatemala's landscapes, rich greens, warm yellows, and deep blues. She handpicked furniture from local artisans, opting for handmade wooden tables and chairs that added charm and authenticity to the space. Even the music playlist was curated carefully, featuring traditional marimba tunes mixed with modern Latin beats. Meanwhile, Maria worked closely with Carlos to finalize the menu. It was important to her that the dishes reflect her heritage while also appealing to a wider audience. They settled on a mix of classic Guatemalan staples, like tamales wrapped in banana leaves, savory enchiladas piled high with toppings, and sweet empanadas filled with fruit, and creative twists on familiar favorites, such as plantain chips, served with spicy mango salsa. Desserts were another highlight, featuring creamy flan, tres leches cake, and thick hot chocolate made from scratch. Throughout this whirlwind of activity, Diego remained Maria's anchor. He accompanied her to meetings whenever possible, eagerly learning about the ins and outs of running a business. At home, he practiced math problems by calculating ingredient costs and designed flyers for the cafe's grand opening using colored markers and construction paper. His enthusiasm was contagious, and Maria often found herself smiling despite the long hours and occasional setbacks. Of course, there were challenges along the way. Construction delays pushed back the timeline, forcing Maria to juggle her hotel job with endless trips to the site. Money remained tight, even with Richard's financial backing, and Maria worried constantly about whether she'd be able to repay him someday. Then there were moments of self-doubt, when the enormity of what she was attempting threatened to overwhelm her. But every time she wavered, Richard was there to remind her why she'd started this journey in the first place. "You're doing this for Diego," he told her one evening after a particularly grueling day. "And for yourself, don't lose sight of that." His words stayed with her, grounding her when the pressure mounted. Slowly but surely, the pieces came together. The walls were painted, the kitchen equipment installed, and the staff hired. A small team of passionate individuals who shared Maria's vision. By the time the final touches were added, a mural of a Guatemalan village painted by a local artist and potted plants lining the windowsills, the cafe looked exactly as Maria had dreamed it would. On the eve of the grand opening, Maria stood in the middle of the empty space, taking it all in. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and spices, and the soft hum of electricity buzzed through the room. Tears welled up in her eyes as she thought about how far she'd come. From cleaning hotel rooms to standing in her very own cafe, ready to welcome customers. Diego appeared beside her, holding a bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked earlier that day. "For you, Mom," he said shyly, handing them over. To celebrate, Maria hugged him tightly, overcome with emotion. "Thank you, mijo," she whispered. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." The next morning, Maria arrived at the cafe well before sunrise, determined to make sure everything was perfect. She arranged trays of pastries in the display case, brewed pots of strong coffee, and lit candles on each table. Outside, a banner hung above the entrance. Maria's Kitchen, a taste of Guatemala. As the sun rose higher in the sky, curious, passers-by began to gather, drawn by the inviting aroma wafting onto the street. When the doors finally opened, Maria greeted each customer with a warm smile, introducing herself and explaining the story behind the cafe. Many were locals who appreciated having a new spot to grab breakfast or lunch, while others were intrigued by the promise of authentic Guatemalan cuisine. By midday, the cafe was buzzing with energy, laughter, and the clinking of plates. Richard showed up later that afternoon, slipping quietly into a corner booth to observe. He watched as Maria moved seamlessly between greeting guests, checking on orders and chatting with her staff. Her confidence was evident in every gesture, every word. When she finally noticed him sitting there, she approached with a grin that lit up the entire room. "Well?" she asked, folding her arms playfully. "What do you think?" Richard leaned back, surveying the scene with a satisfied smile. "I think you've got a hit on your hands," he said. "But more importantly, I think you've created something truly special, something that will inspire others." Maria blushed, shaking her head modestly. "This isn't just mine, it's ours. Without your help, none of this would have been possible." Richard waved off her gratitude, standing up to leave. "Remember our deal?" he reminded her gently. "Pay it. Forward. That's all the thanks I need." As he walked out the door, Maria returned to her work, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. She knew this was only the beginning, a single chapter in a much larger story. But for now, she was content to savor the moment, surrounded by the love of her son, the support of her community, and the realization of a dream she'd once thought impossible. Little did she know, the impact of her cafe would ripple outward in ways she couldn't yet imagine, touching lives far beyond her tiny corner of the city. And Richard, watching from afar, felt a quiet satisfaction knowing he'd played a part in setting it all in motion. As weeks turned into months, Maria's Kitchen became more than just a cafe. It became a cornerstone of the community. Word spread quickly about the warm atmosphere, delicious food, and the inspiring story behind it all. People came not only for the tamales and flan, but also to meet Maria herself, whose kindness radiated as brightly as the colorful mural on the wall. What started as a modest dream had blossomed into something extraordinary. Diego played an integral role in the cafe's success. After school, he'd rush over to help with small tasks, wiping tables, refilling napkin dispensers, or greeting customers with his infectious smile. On weekends, he even took on more responsibility, learning how to operate the cash register and assist in the kitchen. For Maria, seeing her son thrive in this environment was one of the greatest joys she'd ever experienced. He wasn't just helping out. He was growing into a confident young man who understood the value of hard work and teamwork. One day, while Diego was stacking chairs after closing time, a customer approached Maria with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," the woman said softly. "Your cafe has given me hope." Maria blinked, surprised by the comment. "Hope? How so?" The woman explained that she was a single mother struggling to make ends meet. Seeing Maria succeed against such odds inspired her to believe she could overcome her own challenges too. "If you can do it," the woman said, "then maybe I can too." That moment stayed with Maria long after the woman left. It reminded her of why Richard had insisted she pay it forward, not just financially but through inspiration and action. From then on, Maria made it a point to connect with her customers on a deeper level. She listened to their stories, offered advice when asked, and sometimes simply provided a safe space where they could feel seen and valued. Richard continued to play a quiet, yet supportive role in Maria's journey. Though he didn't visit the cafe often, he checked in regularly, either by phone or during brief stops. He never sought recognition for his involvement, preferring to remain in the background. But Maria ensured that his contribution was acknowledged. In one corner of the cafe, she hung a framed note that read, "Dedicated to Richard Langley, whose belief in dreams made this possible." When reporters eventually caught wind of Maria's story, they flocked to the cafe, eager to write articles and conduct interviews. At first, Maria felt uncomfortable being in the spotlight. She worried that people might think she was bragging or forgetting her roots. But Richard encouraged her to embrace the opportunity. "Use your platform wisely," he advised. "Share your story to inspire others." So Maria agreed to sit down with journalists, sharing candidly about her struggles, her determination, and the generosity of a stranger who had changed her life. Her authenticity resonated with readers, and soon, Maria's kitchen gained national attention. The cafe became a symbol of resilience, proving that with grit and support, anyone could achieve greatness. But fame brought its own set of challenges. As business boomed, Maria found herself stretched thin, juggling responsibilities at the cafe while still working part-time at the hotel to ensure stability until the cafe's profits fully covered her expenses. Some days, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. Yet, whenever doubt crept in, she reminded herself of the promise she'd made: to use her success to help others. Inspired by the women in her neighborhood who often struggled to find employment, Maria decided to expand her team. She hired several single mothers, offering them flexible hours and fair wages. To further empower them, she partnered with local organizations to provide training programs in culinary arts and entrepreneurship. These initiatives transformed Maria's kitchen into more than just a place to eat. It became a hub for personal and professional growth. One evening, as Maria sat at a table reviewing receipts, Diego joined her, holding a notebook filled with sketches. "Mom, I've been thinking," he began hesitantly. "What if we opened another cafe someday? Maybe somewhere bigger, where more people can come?" Maria smiled, touched by his ambition. "We'll see, mijo," she replied. "For now, let's focus on making this one the best it can be." Her words weren't dismissive. They reflected the wisdom she'd gained over the years. Success wasn't about rushing forward. It was about building solid foundations and nurturing relationships along the way. Meanwhile, Richard watched from afar, proud of how far Maria had come. Though their interactions were infrequent, their bond remained strong. During one of his visits, he noticed a flyer taped to the cafe's bulletin board advertising a free cooking class for kids. Curious, he asked Maria about it. "It's for children in the neighborhood," she explained. "I want them to learn skills they can use later in life. Plus, it keeps them busy and gives their parents a break." Richard nodded approvingly. "You're creating opportunities not just for yourself but for everyone around you. That's what true leadership looks like." Maria blushed, humbled by his words. "It's what you taught me, to pay it forward." Their conversation shifted to future plans. Maria admitted she was considering expanding the cafe's menu to include catering services, which could generate additional income and create more jobs. Richard offered to guide her through the logistics, emphasizing the importance of scaling sustainably. "Growth is good," he said, "but don't lose sight of what makes this place special." As winter approached, Maria organized a holiday fundraiser to support families in need. Customers donated generously, contributing canned goods, warm clothing, and toys for children. On Christmas Eve, Maria and her staff delivered care packages to homes across the neighborhood, spreading cheer and gratitude. For many recipients, these gifts meant more than material comfort. They represented connection and compassion. That night, as Maria tucked Diego into bed, she reflected on everything that had transpired since that fateful day Richard had knocked on her door. Life hadn't become easy overnight, but it had grown richer in ways she'd never imagined. She thought about the customers who visited daily, the employees who relied on her for livelihoods, and the countless lives she'd touched simply by following her heart. "Mom," Diego whispered sleepily. "Do you think Mr. Langley knows how much he helped us?" Maria kissed his forehead, smiling softly. "I'm sure he does, sweetheart, and I hope he knows how grateful we are." Unbeknownst to Maria, Richard was thinking about her too. Sitting in his penthouse apartment overlooking the city, he scrolled through photos of Maria's kitchen on social media. Each image reinforced his belief in the power of human potential. Helping Maria hadn't just changed her life. It had reminded him of the beauty in giving back, in lifting others up without expecting anything in return. And so, as the year drew to a close, both Maria and Richard carried a renewed sense of purpose. They were proof that acts of kindness, no matter how small, could ripple outward, transforming lives in profound and unexpected ways. Their story was far from over, but already it stood as a testament to the enduring impact of empathy, perseverance, and faith in the unseen possibilities of tomorrow. A year had passed since the grand opening of Maria's kitchen, and the cafe was thriving beyond Maria's wildest dreams. The once empty storefront was now a lively gathering place, buzzing with the chatter of regular customers, families sharing meals, and curious newcomers eager to taste authentic Guatemalan cuisine. Every day felt like a celebration of hard work, resilience, and community spirit. For Maria, this wasn't just a business. It was her heart made tangible, a testament to everything she had overcome. Diego had grown into an integral part of the cafe as well. At 12 years old, he was no longer just helping out after school. He had become a mini entrepreneur in his own right. Inspired by his mother's journey, Diego started experimenting with baking cookies and selling them at the counter during weekends. His creations, soft chocolate chip cookies sprinkled with cinnamon and nutmeg, quickly became a customer favorite. Maria couldn't help but beam with pride whenever someone complimented Diego's specials. It was clear that her son had inherited her passion for creating joy through food. One crisp autumn morning, as Maria unlocked the cafe doors, she noticed a familiar figure walking toward her. It was Richard Langley, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, carrying a paper cup of coffee from a nearby chain store. Smiling warmly, he waved as he approached. "You're drinking someone else's coffee?" Maria teased, raising an eyebrow. "I'm hurt." Richard laughed, holding up the cup defensively. "Just scouting the competition," he joked. "But don't worry, I still prefer yours." They hugged briefly before stepping inside. Over the past year, their relationship had evolved into something resembling a deep friendship. While Richard remained largely hands-off when it came to the day-to-day operations of the cafe, he continued to check in regularly, offering advice or simply showing up to show support. Today, however, there was a seriousness in his demeanor that Maria hadn't seen in a while. "Everything okay?" she asked, motioning for him to sit at one of the corner tables. Richard nodded, though his expression remained thoughtful. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something important. You've accomplished so much here, Maria, more than I ever imagined possible. But I think it's time we discussed the next chapter, for both of us." Maria tilted her head, intrigued. "The next chapter?" "Yes," Richard said, leaning forward slightly. "You've built something incredible, not just for yourself, but for your community. Now I want to challenge you to think bigger. What if Maria's kitchen wasn't just one cafe, but many? What if your impact could reach even further?" Maria blinked, startled by the suggestion. Expansion had crossed her mind before, but she'd always dismissed it as unrealistic. Running one cafe was challenging enough. Managing multiple locations seemed daunting. Still, Richard's confidence in her abilities gave her pause. "I know it sounds overwhelming," he continued, reading her hesitation, "but hear me out. Imagine opening cafes in other neighborhoods, especially those underserved areas where people need opportunities most. Each location could serve as a training ground for local residents, teaching them skills they can use to build better futures for themselves. And who better to lead this movement than you?" Maria sat quietly, letting his words sink in. she thought, about the single mother she employed, the children who attended her cooking classes, and the countless customers who told her how much the cafe meant to them. Could she really take this mission to a larger scale? Would she be ready for the responsibility? What do you think? Richard pressed gently. Maria exhaled slowly, her eyes meeting his. I think it's worth trying, but I'll need your guidance every step of the way. Richard smiled, relief washing over him. Of course, that's what I'm here for. Over the next several months, Maria and Richard worked tirelessly to bring this vision to life. With Richard's financial backing and strategic expertise, they identified potential locations in neighboring communities. Maria insisted on visiting each site personally, ensuring that the neighborhoods aligned with her values of inclusivity and empowerment. She also reached out to local organizations, partnering with them to create job training programs tailored to the needs of each area. The first new cafe opened 6 months later, in a bustling urban district known for its cultural diversity. Dubbed Maria's Kitchen 2, it quickly gained popularity, drawing crowds with its vibrant decor, friendly staff, and mouth-watering menu. Like the original location, it became more than just a place to eat. It was a beacon of hope and opportunity, and now, word spread about Maria's expanding empire. Invitations began pouring in for speaking engagements. Maria found herself standing on stages she'd never dreamed of addressing, sharing her story with audiences ranging from high school students to corporate executives. Her message was simple yet powerful. No matter where you start, no matter how difficult things seem, you have the power to change your life and the lives of others if you're willing to believe in yourself. These talks resonated deeply with listeners, particularly women and minorities who saw themselves reflected in Maria's journey. Many approached her afterward, asking for advice or expressing gratitude for inspiring them to pursue their own dreams. One woman, a young mother named Rosa, went so far as to apply for a position at Maria's Kitchen. Within months, she rose through the ranks, eventually becoming a manager at one of the newer locations. Through all these changes, Maria never lost sight of what mattered most: her family, her values, and her community. She ensured that every cafe maintained the same warmth and authenticity that defined the original location. Whether it was hosting free workshops for aspiring chefs or organizing monthly fundraisers for local charities, Maria remained committed to giving back. For Richard, watching Maria's growth was both humbling and fulfilling. He had entered her life as a curious observer, drawn in by her quiet strength and determination. Now he considered her a true partner, not just in business but in making the world a little brighter. Their bond transcended mentorship. It was rooted in mutual respect and shared purpose. On the anniversary of the second cafe's opening, Maria invited Richard to join her for dinner at the original location. As they sat together at a corner table, surrounded by laughter and the aroma of freshly baked bread, Maria raised a glass of sparkling water in a toast. To new beginnings, she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. And to old friends who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Richard clinked his glass against hers, smiling warmly. To paying it forward, he added. Because that's what makes life meaningful. As the evening drew to a close, Maria glanced around the room, taking in the faces of her employees, customers, and loved ones. This moment, this culmination of struggle, perseverance, and triumph, was everything she had ever hoped for. Yet, she knew it was only the beginning. There were still challenges ahead, still lives to touch, still dreams to chase. But for now, she allowed herself to savor the sweetness of success. After all, it wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone who had supported her along the way. From Diego's unwavering love to Richard's generous belief in her potential, Maria understood that none of this would have been possible alone. And so, as the lights dimmed and the last customers left for the night, Maria locked up the cafe with a contented smile. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities, new adventures, and new ways to inspire others. But tonight, she rested knowing that her story, a tale of courage, kindness, and transformation, would continue to ripple outward, touching hearts and changing lives for generations to come.